shining through.
Most Australians understand the threat posed to the Great Barrier Reef by a warming climate, but another equally iconic Australian World Heritage Site also faces devastation from climate change. The low-lying coastal floodplains of the Kakadu National Park in the Northern Territory are highly vulnerable to future sea level rises, and a new CSIRO report says that all of the park's current freshwater floodplains could be under seawater in just over 100 years. Professor Don Henry is a Melbourne Enterprise Professor of Environmentalism at the University of Melbourne and former Chief Executive of the Australian Conservation Foundation. He's long been involved in conservation efforts in Kakadu and is in New York this week to meet with former US Vice President Al Gore, from where he joins me now. And Professor Henry, you're in the city that never sleeps, and well, it's 2:30 a.m, so you're obviously very passionate about this. Why is Kakadu National Park so vulnerable, and just how devastating could this be?
So Kakadu has got very low-lying floodplains, and for many of us who have visited there, you know, we love those freshwater billabongs, the bird life, the fishing, the great landscapes, but these are so low-lying that they're very vulnerable to sea level rise, and they're very vulnerable to storm surges from cyclones and storm fronts. So it's one of our great national parks, but this report is a warning that it's very vulnerable to climate change.
Why is this so poorly understood? Because we are well aware of what the impacts will be on the Great Barrier Reef, for example.
Yes, most of us have heard that the reef is highly vulnerable to climate change, which it is. But I think we haven't done enough study, and we haven't talked enough as a community about the threats to climate change to some of our other great World Heritage sites, and premium among those is Kakadu. And I think it's very timely this report's been done, and it emphasises two things. One, the importance of acting strongly on climate change, not just because of the impact on us, but because of the impact on our beautiful natural areas. But secondly, we need to put some good management regimes in place in parks like Kakadu so they can be more robust to some of the impacts of climate change.
What's the timeline that we're talking?
Well, we need to get stronger management regimes in place right now. And we've had a report from the world's scientists recently that says the next 10 years is the crucial time that we have to start bringing the world's greenhouse gas emissions down. And we have to remember, to save places like the Great Barrier Reef and Kakadu, it requires global action. But as Australians, we should be showing we're up to that challenge and demonstrating to other nations that we can do this.
What sort of numbers are we talking in animal and plant species that could be affected?
Well, the lowlands in Kakadu, the wetland systems and the river systems, they're some of the most biologically diverse parts of the park. So the phenomenal bird life where you see millions and millions of magpie geese, the barramundi, the crocodiles, they all depend on these landscapes and wetlands. So it would be devastating for Kakadu if the world and we did not act on climate change. And it's imperative that we start strengthening the management of the park right now. And that work, of course, has to be done hand in hand with the traditional owners, the custodians of this beautiful landscape. Yeah,
well, you mentioned that there. I mean, we've talked about the biodiversity there and how important that is, but that's not to mention the cultural significance of Kakadu.
Well, Kakadu's on the World Heritage List for both its natural and cultural values, the magnificent rock art, the deep, rich, living cultures there, and we've even got some of the world's sites of longest continuous occupation of humans anywhere on Earth. So it's a treasure from a cultural point of view and a natural point of view, and we should be redoubling our efforts to protect and look after this magnificent World Heritage Site.
And what's the immediate plan of attack for those efforts?
Well, I think two things. We need our governments to listen more, that fair dinkum Australian leadership is needed on climate change. And then the second thing, invest strongly and act on good, strong management working hand in hand and led by the traditional owners.
Professor Don Henry joining us from New York. Thank you.
My pleasure.